When Frank Fritz got kicked off American Pickers in March 2020, fans were really surprised, but that was just the beginning. Because in September 2024, news that he died made collectors everywhere very sad. As heartbreaking as his death was, it wasn't. Even the most shocking part, rumors about Frank's last words, made people who heard them feel scared. And just when it seemed like the surprise couldn't get any bigger, his stuff revealed something so amazing it left everyone speechless. But before we talk about the discoveries that left everyone shocked, let's take a moment to remember one of the most passionate collectors the world has ever known. You see, Frank Fritz was born on October 11, 1963 in Davenport, Iowa, with a natural curiosity that made him different. While most kids his age were playing baseball and reading the newest comic books, Frank was chasing history. If something had a story, no matter how small or unimportant it seemed, he wanted to know it. Old coins, rusty beer, cans thrown away, stamps, even razor blades that had been used up long ago. He believed every item had a past, a reason, a place in someone's life before ending up here. And he wanted to know every detail as he grew up. So did his passion. He went from pocket-sized collectibles to bigger treasures, motorcycles, dirt bikes, and rare stuff that carried the weight of history on their beat-up surfaces. Flea markets became his battlefield, estate sales his playground. If there was an old barn off a forgotten highway packed with old things from the past, Frank was the guy knocking on the door, ready to dig through the dust. To most people, it was just a weird hobby. To Frank, it was what he was meant to do. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. He didn't jump right into the world of antiques. Instead, life pulled him in a different direction. For almost 25 years, he worked as a fire inspector in Iowa. It was a serious, no-nonsense job, one that needed an eye for detail, being exact, and a promise to keeping people safe. But no matter how much time he spent checking fire rules and looking at buildings, his passion for collecting never went out. In fact, his job only made it stronger every day. He stepped into old firehouses, empty warehouses, and forgotten buildings, places full of hidden gems waiting for someone like him to bring them back into the light. That's when he found himself collecting firehouse stuff, helmets with soot-stained leather, old fire alarms that once rang through, the chaos fire extinguishers that had seen their fair share of action. Frank hunted them all down. It wasn't long before he realized he was onto something bigger than just a personal collection. These old things weren't just cool. They had real value. So he started buying and selling, slowly turning his passion into a side business. Soon enough, the idea of turning his passion into a career started sneaking in. At this point, he had spent years working a steady job, but deep down, he knew where his heart was. Walking away from a stable job wasn't easy, but the pull of his true passion was stronger. So he took the leap. He opened Frank's Finds, a small antique shop specializing in firemen's gear and rare collectibles. At first, it was just a small step towards something new. However, what he didn't know was that that little store was the foundation of a career that would soon shoot him into a world of treasure hunting, adventure, and eventually the kind of fame he never saw coming. Before American Pickers made Frank Fritz a familiar face, he was just a guy with an eye for hidden treasures and a love for the thrill of the hunt. But Frank wasn't alone in this passion. Another Iowa native, Mike Wolf, had the same obsession. They didn't start out as best friends, but their shared love for picking brought them together over time. Mike had the big vision. He saw picking as more than just a hobby. It was a way of life that could be turned into something massive. While Frank was happy running his shop, Frank's Finds, Mike was busy filming his treasure hunting adventures, pitching a TV show to anyone who would listen. It took some convincing, but eventually Frank signed on. What started as two guys hitting the road in search of forgotten old things turned into a reality TV giant. When American Pickers started on the History Channel in 2010, it struck gold. Over 3.1 million people watched the first episode, making it one of the network's most successful debuts. But the show's magic wasn't just in the antiques. It was in the chemistry between Mike and Frank. Their excitement wasn't fake, and their friendship was as real as it got. They had already spent years building relationships in the antique world, earning respect for their fair deals and deep knowledge. Now, with cameras rolling, they were taking audiences along for the ride. Mike had the business smarts, always looking for the next big money item. Frank, on the other hand, was the heart of the operation. He had a way of making people feel comfortable, turning tense deals into friendly conversations. He wasn't just about the money. He genuinely cared about the stories behind the items they found. That realness made him a fan favorite. Whether he was getting excited over a vintage motorcycle or sharing a laugh with a seller, viewers saw someone who loved what he did for over a decade. American Pickers was a must-watch week after week. Frank and Mike hit the road, digging through barns, garages, and junkyards in search of hidden treasures, with Danielle Colby holding down the fort at Antique Archaeology. The trio had a dynamic that just worked. They weren't just business partners, they were friends chasing their passion together. But no road trip lasts forever, and for Frank, the journey that once seemed endless took a turn. No one expected the first signs that something was off with American Pickers didn't make people worry right away. Frank Fritz's last appearance aired in March 2020, but given how crazy the world was at the time, most viewers thought he'd be back before long. What they didn't know was that behind the scenes, Frank was dealing with a bunch of struggles that would ultimately change everything. Frank Fritz never talked much about his personal struggles, but over time some things became impossible to ignore. For years, fans noticed his weight going up and down. Some figured it was just part of getting older, while others worried something was wrong. Eventually, Frank revealed that he had Crohn's disease, a chronic condition that attacks the digestive system. It's painful, unpredictable, and exhausting at first. Frank tried to manage it by sticking to a strict diet, which helped him lose 65 pounds, but Crohn's isn't something you can just fix. It's something you have to fight through every day. The pain, tiredness, and uncertainty were always there, but he never let it stop him from doing what he loved. But health problems weren't the only thing weighing on him. Fame changes things, and for Frank it wasn't always for the better. When American Pickers took off, life got a lot more complicated suddenly. He wasn't just a guy hunting for antiques. He was a reality TV star. Everywhere he went, people recognized him, expected him to be the same fun, quick-witted guy they saw on TV. What they didn't see was the pressure that came with it. Frank admitted that being in the spotlight made him anxious, and over time it took a toll. But it was in 2020 that everything really fell apart. Frank's health got so bad that he had to have major back surgery, and unfortunately, it wasn't a minor procedure. We're talking about 185 stitches, 2 rods in his spine, and a recovery process that would take months on top of that. He was battling personal demons, including addiction. Initially, his absence seemed like a temporary break time to heal and get back on his feet, but as American Pickers moved into its 21st season without him, fans started asking questions. Then in July 2021, Mike Wolf made it official. Frank wasn't coming back. Mike released a statement saying he'd miss Frank and wished him the best, but surprisingly, Frank didn't buy it. In an interview, he called Mike's words hollow and dropped a bombshell that stunned fans throughout his entire recovery. Mike had never once called to check on him, decades of working together, and not a single phone call. Frank made it clear that their relationship had never been as close as people thought. On screen they had chemistry, but off-screen things were different. He believed Mike had been looking for an opportunity to push him out of the show for a long time, and with Frank out of commission, that opportunity finally arrived. Fans were shocked. How could two guys who had spent years traveling, laughing, and building a successful show together just fall apart like that? As expected, the internet exploded with debate. Some blamed Mike for turning his back on Frank, while others pointed to Frank's personal struggles as the real reason for his departure. Meanwhile, Mike responded by insisting that everyone on the show cared about Frank, but also suggested that getting him back on track had been a challenge. The truth, as always, was more complicated than any one side of the story. A friend of both men later revealed that years of working together, long days, high-pressure filming schedules, and the stress of keeping a hit show going had worn them down. Add in Frank's health battles and personal struggles, and the cracks in their friendship became impossible to ignore. The friend described it as a situation where both men simply needed space, a break from the daily grind that had consumed them for over a decade. So when you think about it, this wasn't about one moment of betrayal or a dramatic fallout. It was about two longtime colleagues who, after years of working side by side, had grown apart under the weight of fame, stress, and personal struggles. For fans, it was a tough pill to swallow. The show had made it feel like Frank and Mike would always be a team, but real life told a completely different story. Even after stepping away from television, Frank stayed deeply involved in the antiques world. He understood that the way people collected was changing, with more buyers turning to online shopping. He adapted, launching his own digital storefront and using social media to connect with collectors around the world. For Frank, it wasn't about staying relevant, it was about keeping the spirit of picking alive in a new era. But if there was one thing Frank loved just as much as antiques, it was motorcycles. His passion for bikes started young. One of his earliest big purchases was a 1964 Harley-Davidson, a bike that probably had his parents worried but cemented his love for vintage rides over the years. He built an impressive collection, filling an entire barn with rare and classic motorcycles. And he didn't just collect them, he shared his knowledge. In 2013, he wrote How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles, a book that broke down everything from spotting hidden gems to maintaining classic bikes. He even threw in a section on vintage toy motorcycles, proving that his love for collecting wasn't just about the big stuff. It was about the details, the craftsmanship, and the stories behind every piece beyond his own collection. Frank made it a point to give back to the antiques community. He teamed up with other experts to host antique fairs, exhibitions, and live events, helping connect collectors and dealers with the same passion he had. He also co-authored American Picker's Guide to Picking, offering fans a deeper look into the world of picking. What made Frank special wasn't just his eye for a great find, it was the way he made history feel exciting. Whether he was talking about a rusty gas pump or a forgotten toy from the 50s, he had a way of bringing the past to life to him. Picking wasn't just about buying and selling, it was about keeping stories alive, one treasure at a time. And while most people thought that his feud with Mike would continue for years, everything would change after tragedy struck in July 2022. Frank's life took a devastating turn. He suffered a major stroke at home in Davenport, Iowa. By the time help arrived, he was unresponsive and the situation was critical. He was rushed to the hospital where doctors worked to stabilize him, but the damage was severe. Fans who had followed his journey for years anxiously waited for updates, hoping he'd pull through. After nearly a month in the hospital, he was moved to a rehab facility to start the long, exhausting road to recovery. A stroke doesn't just knock you down, it can take away everything you once took for granted. For Frank, who had spent years traveling the country, striking deals and living life on his own terms, suddenly needing help with basic tasks was a cruel reality. He could no longer take care of himself, and a court had to step in, appointing a guardian to handle his daily needs and a bank to oversee his finances. The independence he'd always valued was suddenly out of reach. And then there was the cost. His medical care reportedly racked up $29,000 a month, a number that made it painfully clear just how much he had lost. But if there was one unexpected outcome, it was how the stroke changed things between him and Mike in May 2023. Something happened that no one saw coming. Frank asked to see Mike. After years of distance, bitterness, and unspoken words, the two finally sat down face to face. A friend who was there later shared that it was emotional. Both men were in tears. Mike told Frank something that hit deep. No one could ever replace him. For the first time in years, it wasn't about the show, the business, or who was right or wrong. It was about the friendship they had built. Long before American Pickers was even an idea, just two guys who loved the thrill of the hunt, traveling back roads, finding forgotten treasures, and sharing a dream. After everything, that bond was still there, maybe buried under years of resentment, but never truly broken. By September 2024, Frank's health had reached a breaking point. After years of battling illness, his body was too weak to fight anymore. The people closest to him knew the end was near. And when the call came, Mike didn't hesitate. He rushed to Frank's side, joining Frank's mother and a close family friend. The room was quiet, heavy with unspoken words, and the weight of everything they had been through for years. Things between Frank and Mike had been complicated, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All that was left was their friendship. The real one, beyond the cameras and headlines. Mike later shared that he was holding Frank's hand when he took his last breath. He whispered to him, telling him he loved him, that he forgave him, that everything was okay. And then just like that, Frank was gone before he passed. Frank's last words hung in the air, unsettling yet meaningful. The past is never really gone. It's always with us, hiding in the shadows, coming from a man who had spent his life unearthing forgotten treasures. Those words felt almost poetic. His loved ones still think about them, wondering what was on his mind in those final moments. According to his death certificate, Frank's passing was a result of complications from his stroke. On top of that, he had been battling aortic stenosis, a condition that made even the simplest tasks, walking, breathing, standing, exhausting. His body had been through so much, fighting every step of the way, but in the end, it just couldn't hold on any longer. But while his passing marked the end of an era, what was found in his estate afterward was so shocking that even those closest to him could hardly believe it. You see, Frank's love for motorcycles was no secret, but what few realized was just how extensive his collection had become after his passing. When the doors to his private garage were finally opened, what was inside shocked even those who knew him best. Row after row of vintage motorcycles filled the space, some carefully restored and gleaming under the lights, others covered in dust, waiting for their moment to shine again. There were rare Indian motorcycles, classic Harley-Davidson, and custom choppers that had been meticulously collected. Over the years, some bikes had been fully restored, while others sat in pieces mid-project, proof of a passion that never faded. For Frank, these weren't just machines. They were memories, moments of adventure, and a testament to his dedication to the craft of picking. He had traveled the country to find them, spent years restoring them, and held on to them like treasured relics of a bygone era. The thought of them being sold off feels almost unthinkable to those who knew how much they meant to him. Yet according to sources, an auction is already in the works. One that will see every bike, every vintage sign, and every carefully preserved piece of history go under the hammer. But here's the part no one saw coming. The proceeds won't be going into a private estate or business fund. Instead, they'll be donated to charity, turning Frank's lifelong passion into one final act of generosity.